So shout out to ProProjects on YouTube for having a great video going over Kia and Hyundai transmission issues. On my 2008 Kia Spectra, I got the code P0700, P0711, and P0743. 700 is a generic powertrain failure code for any type of transmission issue. 711 is for a faulty transmission temperature sensor. And 743, I believe, was for the torque converter clutch control, which controls the lockup of your engine to your transmission while you're at cruising speeds to relieve some heat off of the fluid clutch in the transmission. So it's a great video describing the burnt up wire harnesses. So I had to undertake this project here, and it's the exact same type of thing. I just wanted to point out one thing that was unique is since I had the fluid temperature sensor for that transmission code, I kept looking for where the actual sensor is. And it's actually part of the wire harness there. It's this little resistor, it's a little thermistor right here, right? And so the sensor itself can actually be good, and if you watch his video, he'll go through disassembling this connector, and on the back side there's some solder joints that are typically going to be cracked. I had two of them that looked pretty bad. I tried to trace them back, and my guess is that it goes to the temperature sensor and then also to the plug on this end that goes to the different solenoids on the valve body. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that the temperature sensor on a 2008 Kia Spectra for the transmission is on the wire harness right here. You can replace this wire harness, or if you're good at soldering, you can go ahead and reball the solder joints and go over them with some Permatex sealant, seal them all up. So that's what I chose to do.
It could be a micro, like a micro crack right there where that solder is. Because you see, they don't have, think about it, right? They stick it up there and put like a mono layer of solder around it. So they don't have a little ball on there.
Right.
Right. So.
Yep. Well, let's do them all because they've all been in the same environment. They've all had the same thermal stresses on them. So if one failed, the others can.
Of course, you're going to make a video out of this, right?
Dude, this is going on YouTube.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I think they all look good.
Perfect. Once you have the wire harness ready to go back in, you can see where that wire harness plug is in the housing of the transmission. It's right to the side of the battery there. But it is quite difficult to get that seated and get this clip back in place. But if you look closely at that connector housing, there's actually an O-ring, and that's to make a good seal to the top of the transmission. So when you're placing it in from the bottom side of the transmission casing, you got to make sure that you push pretty securely to get it to snap into place past that O-ring, and that'll give you enough clearance to get the O-ring on, or this C-clip rather. When you push on the back side of that plug, you want to try and push on the edges, not in the middle, because in the middle is where those solder joints are that give you problems. One more challenge is on the wire harness on the top of the transmission here. I talked about that rubber O-ring that makes it a little bit difficult to install the wire harness from the bottom up, but the other thing is the actual connector that's on there. The connector has a gray tab. It's on the bottom half of the screen. It's kind of hard to see from this angle. But most connectors, you think you squeeze them like this, side to side, but this one actually you press down. So you have to use a screwdriver and press downwards towards the ground on that clip, and that will eject it upwards. I ended up breaking mine, and you can see there's some red silicone adhesive up there. I just kind of doused it with high temp silicone to try and hold the connector in place. I sure do love having the right tool for the job. This is the valve block. You've got 3 piston and spring assemblies over here, and you got 1 on the corner over there. Now this valve block is a bit heavy to lift up, and you got to get all of those piston and spring assemblies into the correct bore, into the mating of the transmission there. So you got to make sure that it gets lined up right. So I've got this nice scissor jack, and I've got it modified and welded up with a nice platform on it. It makes it really easy to lift this thing into place in a controlled fashion without having to worry about dropping it on your face. A wise man once said that every job is easy if you have the right tool. So you can see in the transmission casing here, there are these 3 holes on this side that line up with the 3 springs and piston assemblies over here. And there's 1 in the corner. Just for reference, this corner right here is going to be over by the oil filter, the engine oil filter. So that's going to be the front passenger side corner for reference when you're underneath the vehicle. These 3 holes are near the rear of the vehicle. And you got to lift this into place. Oh man, I love this thing. I've used it to lift the front diff in and out of the Xterra. Got it hooked up to the threaded rod and an impact wrench. I can raise it up little by little, get the springs and pistons lined up, and then finish the job. And then while it's holding it up there, just slide in a few bolts to hold it. I also like to mention having the right tool for the job. All of these transmission pan bolts on the 2008 Kia Spectra is pretty easy. They're not very tight, but man, it takes forever by hand. I like my air ratchet, or if you got a 10mm socket on a cordless impact, that'll make quick work out of them. I like to break them loose before putting a power tool on them, just so you don't accidentally break them. So doing a repair twice is never fun. But when I put this transmission pan back together, the transmission filter kit from Beck Arnley came with a quote-unquote premium rubber gasket. And it worked great for about a month, but you can see now there's rubber sticking out the side of the transmission pan. It's blown out in like 3 locations. I'm not really sure what would have caused it, because it really shouldn't be that pressurized in the sump, I wouldn't think. But now I'm having to take the transmission pan out, reseal it. I'm going to have to use some actual sealant instead of the gasket, and I'm going to have to purchase new fluid, not to mention power wash my driveway, since an entire sump of transmission fluid has stained my driveway now. So don't take shortcuts. Go ahead and reseal it properly so you won't have to do it twice. So I got this oil pan off of the bottom of the transmission on the 2008 Kia Spectra, and you can see this rubber gasket that I used from the Beck Arnley kit that had transmission filter and this, premium easy to use rubber gasket. You can see it's tore up right here. It's a nice slit in it. That's going to be leaking fluid. But this section over here is completely blown out. I honestly don't know what to make of it. I know that the bolts went through pretty snugly, but they weren't really like pressurizing or ripping as it went through. It felt kind of like a normal gasket that you would get. But it's broken on both sides over here. It's got a crack over here, starting to deform in a couple places. And the transmission worked absolutely perfectly for about a month, until it left a 6x6 foot leak of Valvoline Max Life ATF in the bottom of my driveway. So I got the pan off. Don't use the rubber gasket that comes with the transmission kit. Can't recommend it in my case. I can't think of anything that would cause a transmission to be the fault, like if it was somehow pressurizing the bottom of the case here. I'm not sure what would cause that, so I gotta assume that it's just kind of a, for lack of a better terms, a shitty gasket. So go ahead and take the time to reseal it with actual silicone adhesive, but now I got to clean all of this off and then reseal it properly.